Hi, this is Joe Speaks Truth. Just 3 years ago, New York City was placed under the harshest lockdowns out of the whole country. While things seem that they're going back to normal, I want to invite you all to listen to the untold stories of the many New Yorkers that had to survive lockdowns and vaccine mandates. Hello, everyone. This is Joe Speaks Truth, and today I have Carmine, who is a freelance artist and an art instructor. How are you doing today, Carmine?
I'm good. How are you, Joe?
I'm doing okay. I'm very happy to have you here because a lot of people that came to the rally, maybe they do know, maybe they do not know that Carmine was the mastermind behind a lot of the posters that were given out for people to hold as we were marching, protesting the lockdowns and then eventually protesting the vaccine mandates. So I'm glad you were able to use your talent for some good.
Oh, yeah, it was a pleasure.
So now let's get into this conversation. So how was your work life or life in general prior to the mandates and the lockdowns?
Well, I was a working artist, art instructor, so it's always a struggle, to make ends meet. But I was doing it, and, I feel like before the lockdown really changed kind of my values a little bit. And, but yeah, before the lockdown, I was pretty much just, like anybody else trying to work in the creative field, trying to do my thing. And then the lockdown happened and like everything kind of changed.
Right. So, why did you decide to go into arts? What about that like motivated you, or should I say inspire you?
Well, I was always into art as a kid. My mother was really artistic, so it was kind of like a natural fit to kind of go into that field. And, again, like a lot of people in the creative fields, I've worked in a lot of different capacities and a lot of non-art related jobs, whatever I had to do to be able to pay my rent. But yeah, I went into it just because I like being creative. I like to do anything that's creative, in any kind of capacity. It's just kind of something I always did, and it just felt natural.
Mm-hmm. And when they announced that there was a global pandemic, what was your initial reaction?
Well, my initial reaction was that this is a bunch of BS, that this is a lie.
So you knew from the very beginning.
From the start, I didn't
Wow.
believe any of it. Yeah. And I actually didn't believe that they would lock down. A lot of people were saying, oh, this is going to happen. This is going to happen. And I was like, there's no way this is ever going to happen. Because if you remember, we had bird flu and swine flu. And every year it was like another, scare campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And nothing like this ever happened. So I was like, they would never do this, not in America.
Right. But
But
then when it happened and they said the 2 weeks to slow down the spread, schools were closed, businesses were closed, churches and other places of worship, we couldn't travel, or whatever the case might be. What were you thinking as time went by? Nothing was going back to normal and the hysteria increased.
right. Well, when the lockdown finally happened, then I knew we were in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
Then I knew this is serious. Like, not that it's the real pandemic, but that the people in power weren't messing around and they were going to change society. And I knew from there that it was going to be a long struggle. It reminded me of like the war on terror and things like that. I
Mm-hmm.
knew, if you remember with Iraq, it was like, oh, we'll be there for
Right.
2 weeks. And then it was like, however, a decade,
Right.
more than a decade, still there in a lot of ways. But it's like, so I knew once the lockdown happened, I was like, all right, like this is really, really serious what's going on.
Mm-hmm. And so you were also one of the very first people I met you in Union Square back in 2020. You're one of the very first people also that was out there. And like I said, you used your talents for good and you made the posters. How was the process of making those posters? And also, um, you were not scared to just speak out and just be outside and let people know, hey, I don't support the lockdowns, knowing that the majority of the people here in New York were scared and they were being very, very nasty to us. So you just didn't care to just like, let me just put myself out there, regardless of whatever the consequences might be of that.
Yeah, I felt like people had to stand up. People had to do something because what was going on was just unprecedented. And yeah, I didn't really think too much about it. I just felt like we just had to get out there and do something.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I did. I tried, like one of the first things that I did was just alone. Like I made like a freedom is essential sign, and I just
Mm-hmm.
stood outside my local park in my area that I would go to almost every day that they locked down. It was at a big intersection and just held my sign, like in the very beginning. It was the only thing I could think of doing. Like I didn't know what else to
That was
do.
pretty bold. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't know. I just felt like people had to speak out in any way they could. Everyone was doing. I feel like everyone approached it a little differently, and
Right. We
and
we took it to the streets. And there's sometimes comments that are like, well, protesting didn't do anything. For me, it's a little shocking when people say that because, first of all, a lot of people met because of those protests. A lot of people no longer felt alone. People were encouraged to stand up because we took it to the streets first, right? When there was nobody. I mean, if we all would have just stayed home and did nothing, I think everything else would have been 100 times worse, in my opinion. And I think us being out there just send the message like, look, there's people here that are not putting up with this crap because they made it seem, the mainstream media especially, and the government officials made it seem like, oh, everyone in New York is just going along with this. It's okay. No. And I think were the first, I guess, to put the resistance for the whole world. I mean, not the whole world, the USA at least. And then I think essentially the whole world because everyone else was just going along with what the US was doing, particularly, I would say New York, because people just look up to us as like, I don't know, the beacon of hope or the place to just follow because New York is so powerful, blah, blah. But yeah, so what do you think about that when people say those things? Oh, the protests didn't do anything and blah, blah, blah.
well, I think they absolutely did something. And like if your followers, I'm sure know you were out there like every day. I mean, you really
Mm,
were hitting the streets, making sure that that our voice was heard, that people knew there was a resistance. But I think it mattered. I think you're right. If we didn't do that, who knows how? Like, it's hard to quantify the effect.
mm-hmm.
But I feel like if it had to have had some effect, it's impossible. I feel like for that much action to not have an effect. And I've at the rallies and stuff, I would always try to talk to passersby, calmly and try not to fight with them. And
Yes, like me. I mean, sometimes I'm very, well, I'm very no nonsense, but you are more like in the middle trying to bring people together. I'm the type of person that I will say things to trigger people. Sometimes that work or doesn't work, but I feel like, oh, there's a method to my madness. But you're very like all about like let's just have a conversation. Let's be calm. You were always about that. How do you even become like that? I don't know because me, I get angry and I feel like now I'm gonna go off on you. So how do you manage?
well, I kind of got there over time. Like in the beginning, I was a lot more like yelling at people,
Mm-hmm.
passing and stuff because it was so crazy. It was hard to really know how to approach it. But after a while, I just was trying to like speak to people. Like if we could have a conversation and they can see we're not like demons or something, that we're not these crazy people, that we could actually have a civil conversation. And I feel like I did. I give out a lot of information to people. I feel like there are some people that maybe I did or other people speak to them have an impact. But I think there's no one way. So I think it was good actually that people like you had your approach, that
Mm-hmm.
different people had different approaches because you never know what one person passing what will get through to them. Some
Mm-hmm.
people maybe need to be yelled at,
Right.
and some people maybe need to be spoken to in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that there was people approaching it from different ways, I think was a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
There's no one way I think to do it, you know.
And I think it just works so well. And we had a little bit of everything because you remember how we were being called Trump supporters, white supremacists, and things of that nature. It was very rough. Do you remember that first anti-lockdown protest from Union Square to Washington Square? The things that people were telling us, and when we actually got to Washington Square Park, the ways that a lot of those NYU students were acting towards us. You remember that?
I remember that, and I remember you like were so angry at one point because they weren't listening. They were,
Mm-hmm.
and I just remember that like a real like display of passion. Like you were trying to get through to them, and they
Mm-hmm.
were not listening. They just had this in their head that we were these horrible people who didn't care about anyone else, and yeah, no, I remember that. Yeah, it really kind of went really south in Washington Square. It was
Yeah,
a little
yeah.
better in
It
Union
was, it
Square.
was, it was, no, I mean, it was rough because honestly, I knew that there were people saying stuff and I got into it several times on my social media account. But to actually see it from like physically, like a physical level, because I'm online, I'm like, you can say whatever you want, whatever. But the way people were react, people seriously thought that we were trying to kill them
Yeah,
because we were not wearing a mask.
yeah.
Did you ever think that in a point in our life or in history, we would get to the point that a human being will look at you as a public health threat because you're not putting on a mask? Like, does that even make sense?
Yeah, it was crazy. And the irony of it all was on all of these mask bags, it said they're non-medical, they don't protect against infectious disease, they protect against dust and pollen. So, it was just crazy to me that people would believe this. And it says right on the bag that they don't do anything,
How
you know?
how do you think we even got to this point of insanity? What do you think happened to New Yorkers or Americans generally?
That's a really good question. I don't know. I don't know how we got here. I think the war on terror and the Patriot Act and all those types of things kind of paved the way a little bit for this.
Hmm.
If you remember, like after 9/11, before 9/11, like for example, after 9/11, everyone has to open their bags wherever they go, and
Yes.
police
Hmm.
can search your bags randomly. Still to this day, they have those
Right.
announcements on the subway. And that people forget that was not normal in America. That was kind of like a really big change, and it's kind of been completely normalized. But then, everything else, all the surveillance and the monitoring, kind of giving up your privacy. Um, I think a lot of the stuff in the 2000s and 2010s, like social media, become like really polarized people.
Hmm.
There was stuff leading up to it, but I never thought it would be like this, though. So I don't know what happened. I
Hmm.
really, I don't know.
And it just seemed like it just happened overnight. I mean, it's just mind blowing. It happened overnight, um, in this country, and you would think that knowing the history of America was fighting or getting involved sometimes in other countries' business, you would think that Americans would be like, nope, I'm not putting up with this. I'm not shutting anything down. But it was just so scary to see how in New York, people just went along with it. And there's millions of us here, and people seriously thought it was for public health and safety. And the few that actually knew the truth, like you and I, some people were scared to get ostracized by family members and friends. What about the rest of your family? How are they when it comes to this stuff?
Well, I'm lucky that my immediate family, like my siblings, pretty much understood what was going on for the most part. For some of them it took a while, but generally speaking, they kind of understood. They maybe just not the activist type. But I do have other family members who are completely buying into it, and just until recently were like willing to kind of meet together with us and have family gatherings. Like for years, they really were just
Wow.
staying indoors and masking and all that stuff. So I definitely have family members who went along with it and who kind of still to this day believe that stuff. And I'm not trying to say anything necessarily negative against them, but and then ones that didn't. But I was lucky that like my immediate family weren't
Mm-hmm.
buying it because I don't know what I would do if like one of my siblings was like complete opposite and like.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I feel like that was part of the goal too, was to divide everyone, like pit family member against family member, pit neighbor against neighbor. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Just create this massive division. That's what they do. They just wake up every morning, the people in power, and figure out ways just to create chaos amongst the people, and that's what I think they did.
Right, and it worked. Because I never thought that I would have people that I have gone to high school with, or people like that I was still in contact with that we used to just talk online. insinuating that I was a sociopath because I said, I don't want to put a mask on. You put a mask on. I don't want to stay home. You stay the fuck home if you feel like, going outside is going to, I don't know, kill you because my mentality was this. I was born one day. I know that I'm going to die one day. I just don't know when. And it's inevitable. There's nothing you could do. It cannot be controlled. No government agency, no medical professional. No one can stop that because we're human beings and there's only so much that we can control. So I just thought it was abnormal. And, it came from people that were highly educated, with college degrees and things of that nature. They were just not capable of putting 2 + 2 = 4. To them, 2 + 2 became 5 all of a sudden in 2020. So that was very disturbing to me. Very disturbing. And I know the divide and conquer strategy is needed. In order to take over a country, you had to cause chaos.
Right.
Otherwise, it wouldn't work. If people were united, or at least if people were not being so much fear in the propaganda, then you will have a population of people that are self-aware and that would, stand in truth and power and be like, no, I'm not doing this. You're not shutting me down because meanwhile, the small businesses were shut down. The corporations made trillions of dollars out of the lockdowns.
Right.
And people like yourself and I were affected financially because I'm assuming, I mean, with everything getting shut down, I was able to work remotely initially. But how were you were you able to apply for unemployment?
Luckily, I was able to apply for unemployment, but I did lose. And then there was actually some because at the time my primary source of income was it was in painting instruction. So luckily, some of those classes were able to go virtual, go online, which I didn't even like, but I just did it. But generally speaking, I lost my income from all of that, and yeah, it was really difficult. It was upsetting. I was really upset too with my coworkers. I was on like a group, we had a big group chat, and they were all attacking me like unbelievable. I couldn't even believe it because I was saying because my boss actually was saying, oh, should we? This was even before the lockdown. He was really buying all this. He's like, should we just voluntarily lock down? I was like, no, of course not. You know what I mean? Of course you shouldn't lock down. I was trying to show them, explain things, and I was just completely attacked. Completely attacked by them all. There was maybe one or two that tried to voice some reason, and they got attacked. But I wasn't going to let them do that to me. I was like, I was.
Oh, wow. And you know what's funny? Because like I know you and like you're always so calm about everything. So this is like shocking the fact I like the fact that you look like so innocent, I guess, but you're actually on the inside. There's like a tiger inside of you, and you're not even scared. Because I remember the situation that happened to you with the bus.
Oh, right.
Can you talk about that? That you were told to get out of the bus because of the mask.
Yeah, I mean that happened to me constantly because I wouldn't wear a mask anywhere, and I was able to find the places that allowed you in without a mask. But I would ride the bus without a mask, and very often that was the hardest place to do without a mask because the bus driver would pull the bus over. Then
Because of one person
because
not
of
wearing a
one
mask.
person, and I would try to explain that, if you have a medical condition, you have a medical reason for not wearing a mask, you don't have to wear it, and they don't have a right to ask you what that is. That's actually what it said in the actual mandate. People don't even realize it. And yeah, they would pull the bus over, call the cops on me, make me get off the bus.
Did
And
that discourage you from like did it discourage you from like stop advocating for yourself and like did it ever make you feel like, oh, I have to wear a mask?
No, it just made me stop riding the bus, really. I had to figure out other ways to get around because you could do it on the subway because people really didn't say anything until the bus gets pulled over. Then all of the other people on the bus get furious, with you. And I've been assaulted on
It's
the bus.
that would have been the perfect opportunity for people to be like, no, just let him stay on the bus. But the passengers were also attacking you verbally, correct?
Yeah, attacking me verbally and physically. I've been physically attacked on the bus. I've been surrounded by like men and like threatened. I've been pushed and shoved. You know what I mean? I was like, back off because this person pushed me, was shoving me, and he wanted to fight. And it was like, that's not why I'm there. I'm not here to get into a brawl with someone on a bus. But you need to back off.
Right.
Yeah, it was crazy. It was crazy. There were so many instances on the bus where it was just insane. It was like they even had one time like one of the MTA like supervisors come down, like the bus was pulled over, it wasn't moving, and somehow the MTA supervisor came. And
Because you were not wearing a mask, not because you were attacking anybody,
yep.
not because you were doing any criminal activity, but because you refused to put on a mask.
Yeah, and he was kind of participating in like he didn't really physically assault me, but he physically blocked me because at that point I had gotten off the bus because the police came. So he eventually came and was like literally standing in front of the bus door. Like it was just crazy. But eventually I just can't. It's like there's only so much of those situations like before it just like it's just too much. I was just like, all right, I'm just not going to ride the bus anymore. Like I can't get into these types of altercations every day. Like it's
Right.
just like too
It
much.
was stressful, exhausting, and it's just
And
wow.
and it wasn't working. It was making the people on the bus felt like I was the enemy. Like I'm making them late for work. Just put on a mask. Just put on a mask. What is wrong
Just
with you?
comply,
Yeah,
Carmine.
just
There's nothing
comply.
wrong. Just comply. Is the mask, the vaccine, and then just comply and go to a concentration camp, right?
Right. And it actually was a blessing in disguise because I started walking places and things like that, and I discovered lots of really cool shops and things.
Hmm.
It actually wasn't so bad after I decided, you know what, I'm just going to have to not ride the bus.
Wow. So basically, you were ostracized front to side from participating in the bus, and then eventually escalated with the vaccine mandate. So how was that for you, not being able to go to restaurants and places like that?
Um, well, I just didn't go. I honestly at that point, once the mandate, the vaccine passport came in, I was already, all in obviously, and I didn't care.
Hmm.
And like I was kind of saying before, I had already figured out the places that will let you in
Hmm.
without any of that. So I knew the places I could go to where even if they had the sign, even if the people there were masked, they just wouldn't bother you about it.
Right.
So those were the places I would go. But yeah, I wasn't able to go to restaurants and movies and things like that. But honestly, whatever. That's a really small price to pay to, it's like I'm not going to comply just to go to a restaurant or just to
Right.
go to a movie,
Right. But
please.
many people did, unfortunately,
Yeah,
for travel, for movies, for restaurants. And it's such a shame, in my opinion, because, I mean, that's all it took for you to just go to get this experimental gene therapy because you wanted to go to the movies in a restaurant.
yeah,
Things that, like, you could watch a movie in your house, you can eat food in your house.
yeah.
I mean, granted, now that I'm agreeing with the discrimination part, but those you could have been inconvenienced because it wasn't like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I just feel like a restaurant is not worth my soul.
Exactly.
So
It's like sell your soul for convenience. Sounds like a deal with the devil. You know what I
it
mean?
was.
That's what it
I
always
think it
is.
was a deal with the devil, especially when they started to coerce people, in the working class to get this done. It was definitely a deal with the devil. I like the fact that you even said that. Um, I want to say, how do you feel about being in the art industry and seeing other people in the same field as you just going along with this? Because typically artists are supposed to like illustrate or show like, like the things that are going on in the world, and you're supposed to use your gifts to express like injustice and things of that nature. But it seemed like the art industry just decided to just go along, and instead of exposing the lies, they decided to use their gifts to promote even more propaganda.
They did. Yeah. Well, that's why it was important for me personally to try to, at least in some way, contribute with some like signs and posters, using art. Because that was like my goal. Like, I didn't want people stereotyped us as like you said, Trump supporters, white supremacists, and far right people, and that's not the truth. That's not our community. Maybe, and it was just a way to smear us. So I would, not that there's anything wrong with being on the right or Trump supporters. I'm not saying that, but they would just dismiss what we had to say. It was like a divide and conquer technique. So I would try to approach it with creativity, like making signs with creativity and art, and try to make them like kind of beautiful to look at, or what I thought was beautiful to look at, because I guess I just feel like the same like human impulse that like wants to create art and wants to create beauty and things like that. It's the same human impulse that wants to be free. It's the same
Right.
human impulse that wants free will. It's like all connected. So I was trying to just present our message in a way that was unexpected to most
Mm-hmm.
people passing.
Right.
They wouldn't expect it coming from like an artistic or like a creative point of view. They
Mm-hmm.
just look down on us as like these degenerates or something, you know?
Yes,
But it's
yes,
like,
yes.
no, we're expressing ourselves, and this
Right.
is about freedom and free will and creativity and
Right.
love and beauty, and
Mm-hmm.
it's not about what you think it's about.
Right. And how was the process of you making those posters? How was that? Was it fun, or like did it take a couple of days to do that? Because you had a lot of you brought a lot of posters.
Yeah, it was a lot of work, but I didn't really think about it, you know, honestly, I didn't think too hard about it. It's weird how a lot of this stuff happened just organically.
Mm-hmm.
You know, usually I really overthink things too, you know,
Mm-hmm.
but during this all it just kind of unfolded, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a lot of work, but it wasn't anything that, you know, it just happened, you
Right.
know.
And it was needed. Like I think we had people of different careers just come together and use their gifts and talents in order to like be able to reach the masses. And with that being said, what is your final message?
Uh, well, my final message about everything is for, I guess, for people to remember the way that the data and stuff was manipulated and then called the science, you know, like from day one, the CDC's own website said only 5% of COVID deaths were from COVID. The rest had like four other causes of death. The mask studies were all, the ones they cited were all, none of them were randomized controlled trials, meaning none of them had control groups.
Mm-hmm.
So all the control group studies showed masks do nothing. And people didn't want to hear it. And so just remember the way they manipulated the data and then presented it as science. And my other message would be to for people for people I'm trying to remember, but for people I'm getting a little tongue tied, but I had a message that I was thinking of. So it's for people to remember their argument, the crux of the argument for the lockdown. That's my message. If you remember, was that your freedom, you being free, threatens me. Like that I
Right.
have a right to restrict your freedom because your freedom is a threat to me.
Right.
And I want people to really remember that and think about that and what a false argument that is because our freedom doesn't come from the government, it doesn't come from anyone else, it comes from God. And if you don't believe in God, it comes from nature or the universe.
Mm-hmm.
And that means nobody, including the government, has a right to restrict that. And yeah, I just want people to remember that and remember what a false argument that was because if you think you have a right to impose your will over somebody else's body, that you have a right to force someone to get a vaccine, that you have a right to force someone to lock down in their house, that you have a right to force someone to wear a mask, you are taking control of their body. You are forcing your will on their body, and that is wrong. That is a huge threat to anybody who wants to live in a free society. If you're afraid, you wear a mask. Like you said earlier, if you're afraid, you wear a mask. If you're afraid, you lock down. If you're afraid, you take their experimental vaccine or gene therapy injection. But don't force me to do it because that violates every principle of like a free society. And people forgot that. People, forgot that that's what being in a free society is.
Right.
So that would be my message. Just remember their false arguments and remember that it was wrong and just don't forget what happened you know and pretty much that's basically it.
Well, thank you, Carmine. I think you said a lot, and I hope people take that into consideration. But like you said, it's true. If you're fearful, you do whatever is best for you. But as far as like imposing your stuff onto me, your beliefs onto me, I'm not gonna go down for that at all, at all. So I definitely hope that your words reach a lot of people, especially those that were in the art industry, to remember that you're supposed to use your talent and creativity in order to, I guess, better society and to actually have messages that are going to be uplifting and truthful. That you should not use your gifts and talents to, spread propaganda, because it was propaganda. I remember clearly when they had the signs that were saying that if you did not wear a mask, you were a bad person, and that's brainwashing. And listen, I'm all for people having to have their jobs. But those people that put up those signs, I seriously do wonder how you sleep at night knowing that you contributed to crimes against humanity. So, Carmine, thank you so much, and thank you for the contribution that you have for the medical freedom movement here in New York City.
Oh, thank you, Joe.